Houston, Texas was no stranger to violence in 1990, but what happened on this night felt different. This was not a crime of rage in a dark alley or a robbery gone wrong on a crowded street. This was quiet, personal, and terrifyingly deliberate. The city was expanding fast, new suburbs, empty lots, half-lit roads stretching into silence. These places became known unofficially as lovers' lanes. They were not marked on maps, but everyone knew them. For young couples, these places meant privacy. For someone else, they meant opportunity. They were young. They were ordinary. They had plans that extended far beyond this night. The man had just finished work earlier than usual. The woman had told her family she'd be home late. Neither of them had any reason to believe they were being watched. Friends later described them as inseparable, not reckless, not careless, just young and in love. That evening, they decided to drive, no destination in mind, just movement, just time together. The car headed west, away from city noise, away from traffic, away from help. The area they stopped in wasn't officially a park. It was a deserted stretch of road, bordered by trees and tall grass. Locals used it for years. Police rarely patrolled it. That night, it was empty. The engine was turned off. The radio was low. Windows were cracked open for air. Nothing felt unusual. That's the most frightening part. Someone was already there. Investigators later believed the killer didn't arrive suddenly. He was likely already nearby, watching, waiting, perhaps hidden in the tree line, perhaps parked farther down the road. There were no witnesses, no passing cars, no screams reported. Whatever happened next happened fast. At some point after midnight, the quiet shattered. The driver's side window was approached first. The couple never had time to escape. A weapon was produced. There was no prolonged struggle. This was controlled. Shots were fired at close range. Inside the car, panic lasted seconds, if that. Both victims were struck. The killer did not take valuables. There was no sexual assault. This was not about money. The car remained where it was. The bodies were left inside. The killer walked away. Hours passed before anyone noticed the vehicle. Early morning light revealed what darkness had hidden. A passerby slowed, sensing something wrong. The car had been there too long. Inside, there was no movement. Police were called. When officers arrived, they knew immediately this was not an accident. The windows were damaged. Blood was visible inside the vehicle. The area was secured. Both victims were pronounced dead at the scene. No weapon was found. No suspect was nearby. The silence returned, heavier than before. Detectives worked through the morning. They photographed tire tracks, measured shell casings, searched nearby brush. Nothing led away from the scene. No fingerprints that didn't belong to the victims, no clear footprints. The killer had been careful or lucky. As news spread, fear followed. This wasn't the first couple attacked in an isolated area, and it wouldn't be the last. Residents began asking the same question. Was someone hunting couples? The story did not begin at the Lover's Lane. It began hours earlier, under ordinary skies, in ordinary places. That normalcy would later haunt investigators. The young man left work earlier than expected that day. Co-workers remembered nothing unusual, no arguments, no distress. He spoke casually about weekend plans. The young woman spent the afternoon at home. She made phone calls, she changed clothes, she told her family she would be back late. Nothing about the day suggested danger. Nothing hinted it would be her last. They met in the early evening. Friends later confirmed seeing them together, laughing, relaxed. There was no argument, no tension. They drove through familiar streets first. Music played softly. Then the city lights thinned. Detectives later tried to understand why that exact spot was chosen. It wasn't random, but it wasn't planned either. Couples had parked there for years. It offered privacy and invisibility. Investigators believe the killer may have noticed the couple earlier, possibly at a gas station, possibly at a traffic light, or maybe he simply waited there every night. This theory disturbed detectives the most because it meant this was not chance. When police began interviews, inconsistencies appeared immediately. Several locals claimed they had driven past the area that night. Later, timelines didn't match. One witness said they heard a loud noise but couldn't recall the time. Another said they saw a car but not the color. Some statements changed days later. These were not outright lies, but they weren't truth either. Fear has a way of distorting memory. Autopsies confirmed both victims died from gunshot wounds. The shots were close range. There were no defensive injuries. This suggested the attack happened suddenly, no warning, no chance to flee. Ballistics revealed a common handgun caliber, Not rare, not traceable. Shell casings were minimal. This frustrated investigators. It meant the killer did not stand out. Robbery was ruled out. Nothing was taken. Sexual assault was ruled out. There was no personal connection uncovered.
This wasn't crime of passion. It was something colder. By the end of the week, rumors flooded the city. Some claimed it was a gang initiation. Others whispered about a serial predator. Police denied all theories publicly.
Privately, detectives feared the worst. One detail haunted the case. There was a gap, nearly an hour, between when the couple likely arrived and when they were killed. What happened during that time?
Were they talking? Did they notice someone nearby? Or was the killer watching the entire time? A local man known for prowling the area was questioned. He denied being there, then changed his story.
But there was no evidence tying him to the scene. He walked free. Parents warned their children. Couples stopped parking in secluded spots. The lovers' lanes went dark. By the third week, the case had already begun to cool. Not because detectives stopped working, but because the trail kept dissolving. One name kept resurfacing in internal discussions, not in press briefings, not in public records, only behind closed doors. He lived less than 5 miles from the lovers' lane. He had been questioned before, unrelated incidents. Neighbors described him as quiet, too quiet. He admitted knowing the area well. He denied being there that night. Then he changed details. But there was no physical evidence, no weapon, no eyewitness. And without that, suspicion meant nothing. Another suspect emerged briefly, a man who claimed he was driving nearby. He reported hearing something like fireworks. When detectives checked traffic logs, his timeline didn't align. When questioned again, he adjusted his story. Not enough to charge him, just enough to unsettle investigators. Eventually, he lawyered up and vanished from the investigation. Years later, retired officers would admit something disturbing. Some early evidence was never digitized. Some records were misplaced. A few photographs were missing from the file. A supplemental report was never found. No one could say when or how it happened. Whether it was negligence or something worse, no one knows. Detectives quietly compared this case to others. Different locations, different years, same pattern. Young couples, isolated roads, close-range gunfire, no robbery, no witnesses.
Officially, no connection was ever declared. Unofficially, fear grew. What chilled investigators most was the discipline. No panic shots, no excess violence, just enough force to end 2 lives, quickly. This was not impulsive. This was practiced. While police chased dead ends, families waited. They answered the same questions again and again. They attended meetings with no updates. Every phone call raised hope. Every silence crushed it. Within months, headlines disappeared. New crimes replaced old ones. The city moved on. But the killer never faced a courtroom, never faced a name. Investigators quietly acknowledged something unthinkable. What if this wasn't his first time? And worse, what if it wasn't his last? By the time winter arrived, the case had slowed, but it had not stopped. Behind closed doors, detectives were still circling one name. They just couldn't say it out loud. Internally, investigators referred to him only by initials, not to protect him, but to protect the case. He had no criminal record for murder, but his history unsettled everyone. He had been questioned in unrelated incidents involving trespassing. He knew isolated roads well. Too well. There was no DNA. In 1990, forensic technology was limited. No camera footage, no phone tracking. Witnesses couldn't place him at the scene. Ballistics couldn't tie him to a weapon. Everything pointed, but nothing landed. Then something else happened. Resources were quietly shifted. Detectives reassigned. The case was no longer priority. Officially, there was no explanation. Unofficially, pressure came from higher up. Houston had too many murders that year. Among detectives, one theory refused to die. What if the killer was not local to the victims, but local to the locations? Someone who knew where couples parked. Someone who waited. Someone patient. This wasn't rage. This was selection. Police reviewed older reports, unpublished, forgotten. Gunshots reported near isolated roads. Cars found abandoned. Couples scared, but alive. These weren't murders, but they felt like rehearsals. No official link was ever announced, but some detectives stopped letting their children park anywhere secluded.
As years passed, families returned for answers. They were told the same words: "We're still investigating."
But behind those words was truth. There was nothing new. By the mid-1990s, the case was marked inactive. Not closed, not solved. Just waiting. The killer was never arrested, never questioned again, and never publicly named. For years, the case sat untouched, a name without a face, a file without a future, until one phone call changed everything. It came in late, years after the murders. The caller refused to give a name. The voice was calm, too calm. He said he knew who did it. He spoke about the lover's lane with details never released to the public. He mentioned the angle of approach, the position of the car. He named a man detectives recognized immediately, the same name they never spoke publicly. Detectives reopened the file. Old boxes were pulled from storage. Some evidence was gone.
Others were degraded beyond use. Time had done what the killer couldn't: erase proof.
The named suspect had moved years earlier, out of state, no forwarding address.
Worse, he had died months before the call. If the caller was telling the truth, justice had just slipped away. Who was the caller? Detectives tried to trace the number. It led nowhere. Payphone. Unregistered line. Some believed it was guilt. Others believed it was fear. Or maybe someone trying to clear their conscience. How did the caller know so much? Not rumors, not newspaper facts. Scene-specific details. That question still has no answer. Families were informed carefully. No arrests, no charges, just information. Hope returned and vanished the same day. The case returns to silence. Without a living suspect, the case stalled again. Files returned to storage. By now, investigators understood something critical. This crime wasn't chaotic. It was calculated. And calculation always comes from a certain kind of mind. Behavioral analysts were consulted quietly, not officially, not on paper, just conversations between exhausted detectives. They agreed on one thing immediately. This was not a young offender. This was not a first attempt. The killer approached without alerting the couple. No warning shots, no verbal exchange confirmed. That meant confidence, experience, someone who believed escape was guaranteed. This question troubled investigators deeply. Couples meant witnesses, couples meant risk, yet the killer chose them anyway. Profilers suggested something unsettling. This wasn't about the victims. It was about control over intimacy. Couples parked, they stayed still, and they rarely expected danger. Investigators believe the killer may have observed multiple couples before acting, watching routines, learning habits, waiting for the right moment. This patience suggested obsession, not impulse. Many killers seek recognition, not this one. No notes, no calls to police.
He didn't want fame. He wanted silence. Profilers raised a theory no one wanted to say aloud. What if this murder wasn't the peak, but the end?
What if the killer stopped because he felt complete, or because age or death stopped him? Even years later, officers admitted something privately. They never felt like the killer left the city. They felt like he blended back into it.
Someone ordinary, someone forgettable, someone you wouldn't notice twice. For many detectives, this case stayed personal, not because of what they knew, but because of what they didn't. Time passed the way it always does, quietly, relentlessly, but this case never truly faded. Every few years, the file resurfaced, a new detective, a new review, the same unanswered questions.
Advancements in forensic science gave families hope: DNA databases, ballistics digitization, behavioral analytics.
But hope and reality rarely walk together. The evidence was old, too old. Biological material was insufficient. Chain of custody gaps existed. Digital reconstruction helped visualize the scene, but it couldn't create proof. Technology had evolved. The case had not. One decision from the early days stood out painfully. The lover's lane was not sealed long enough. Weather passed through. Foot traffic followed. What might have been traceable then was gone forever.
No one was blamed, but everyone remembered. Younger residents had never heard of the case. The road still existed. People still drove past it.
They didn't know what happened there, and the ground didn't speak. Occasionally, families spoke to media, not with anger, with exhaustion.
They didn't demand punishment. They wanted truth. Because it wasn't random, because it wasn't solved, and because someone walked away.
Unidentified, unaccountable. Statistically, killers like this rarely confess. They age. They disappear into ordinary life.
The truth may already be buried, not in files, but in memory. This case didn't end with an arrest. It ended with silence. A silence that still echoes.